Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bill Clifford, President and CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America in Washington, D.C. WACA, as we are known, is a national association of 90 nonpartisan, nonprofit World Affairs Councils across the U.S., which are engaged every day in educating the American public on critical national and global issues of our time. We are delighted to be partnering with NATO in Brussels to bring a special program to the US virtually starting May 17 and running for 10 days through May 27. It's titled Strengthening the Alliance to Address New Security Threats. This project will encompass 6 different World Affairs Councils from Colorado Springs, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Minnesota, Alabama, and California to discuss the most pressing issues facing the North Atlantic Treaty Organization today. And to start us off, we are delighted to present Ambassador Baiba Braje, who is Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO in Brussels. Ambassador Braje was born in Riga, Latvia, educated there, earned 2 degrees at the University of Latvia in law and in communication science. She joined the Latvian Foreign Ministry in 1993 and had an illustrious career that included ambassadorships to the Netherlands and later the United Kingdom, August 2016 to May 2020, at which point she joined NATO as Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at a time when COVID was breaking all out and everybody was in really difficult position carrying out jobs. She took on a new one, and a very important one, where she oversees the coordination of strategic communication activities across all NATO civilian and military bodies and commands. We are delighted to have you with us, Ambassador Braje, and look forward to the next half hour discussing important issues with you.
Thank you very much. And NATO is proud and excited to be partnering with the World Affairs Council of America to bring NATO outside the usual audiences in Washington, D.C., and to be outside the Beltway. We are much grateful to you and to your team for organizing this set of events, and we have brought the best and the brightest from NATO to America, this time virtually. But next time we will do that in person. Thank you very much for your work, and we look forward to these events.
We certainly also look forward to engaging with you in person, and I am grateful to NATO's Public Diplomacy Division for having supported in the past WACA's National Conference and also our high school program, Academic World Quest, which is a competition that engages our young people. I'd like to start, Ambassador Braje, just by understanding your work. We are delighted to do this project, which, as you mentioned, gets us beyond the Beltway, but you have a global role to engage audiences worldwide about the alliance. What's your day-to-day work like, and what's your vision for how NATO is presented in a public diplomacy role around the world?
As we all know, NATO is the world's strongest defense alliance and has been that since 1949. It's a living impersonation of the transatlantic bond that we hear so much. But at NATO, that is the one and only organization where we really partner and work on everyday basis to strengthen us militarily, politically, but also in Secretary General's 2030 vision to be stronger globally, to be more engaged globally. So in that respect, NATO is indeed this political military alliance that ensures that those countries who have committed to each other, now there are 30 of them, in everyday basis, consult on the issues of importance to them, to understand each other, but also to find the whole spectrum of means to resist all threats to our security and to deter, and if necessary, to defend. NATO has adopted throughout the years. There have always been threats against NATO. There have always been efforts to undermine. There have always been subversion, and through different means. Of course, now with technology and with the new emerging technology aspects and various developments, those threats and those existing challenges have become so much more present in everyday person's basis. When we think about cyber threats, when we think about threats to energy security that the US has been hearing lately so much about, or when we think about disinformation, those all threats are under so-called paragraph 5, which provides that member states come to each other defense. But in the same time, they of course threaten our society's bases, you know, the very democratic institutions that we are about, because we are not just any alliance. The NATO statute that is only 14 paragraphs long and is, you know, one of the most beautiful legal texts I have seen. Simple and straightforward, as you know, the founders said, it has to be such that even the milkman from Oklahoma would understand what is meant there. Then when we look at it, of course, this is an alliance that is based on common values, on the rule of law, and to protect the liberty and our countries. So it's not just by coincidence that we have committed to each other. And now, in the modern age, of course, that commitment has to be also adopted and interpreted in a different way. Be it the threats, what happens in space to the allied installations there, if there are attacks, in cyberspace, and in other spheres. So when we look at the undersea communication cables that enable our everyday lives, or the other parts, very much around the private sector, right? It's not just about the governments anymore.
Sure.
So the big issue of resilience comes into play, resilience of our societies, where the private sector will play a bigger role. So not only the governments, not only defense sectors, but private sector, civil society, academia, so on and so forth. So for all this, of course, the Secretary General has launched the initiative that is called NATO 2030. And again, that is meant to adopt the alliance for the future. And that will be the main sort of decision-making point that the allies will be dealing with during the summit and at the summit of 14th June 2021. Of course, I cannot prejudge yet what will be the results of that summit, but very clearly, the efforts are around these future threats. What is the deterrence and defense in the future? How the emerging and disruptive technologies are reflected in that respect. It's around the new threats and challenges such as climate security, such as resilience, how allies jointly but also individually interpret these tasks, because strong societies is a basis for strong military and strong defense. This all will...
I was going to say many of those issues are the ones that our councils will be taking up from May 17. I want to come back to how you pinpointed very colorfully the milkman in Oklahoma and his or her understanding of NATO and its importance. It was very clear when the treaty organization was founded and became an alliance in 1949, because the threat was so obvious. It was designed to serve as a counterweight against Soviet aggression. The world was afraid of nuclear war. It had a lot of support publicly in the United States. When the Cold War ended, there was a lot of talk about the potential obsolescence of NATO. Did it have a purpose? What should it be? And now, you know, over the last few years, not just in the United States under the Trump administration, questioning the significance and value of NATO, but also even among European partners, we had a bit of internal divisions, it seemed. I will name the countries, but not necessarily that they are clashing. But France's President Macron described these divisions as causing near brain death. And on the other hand, Chancellor Merkel of Germany said the alliance is as vital as it ever have been. Where's the truth in this? What is the importance that you can explain to the American people why NATO matters.
Let me start by saying that the only and the first time that the famous Article 5 was actually activated was after the attacks of 9/11 at the World Trade Towers. Allies really felt very strongly about helping the US and committing to help the US when and if necessary. Allies joined the US in Afghanistan to indeed resist the terrorist threats from there. And now when drawing down the forces, because Afghanistan in those terms is not anymore a basis from where you can launch threats against America or other countries, other allies, then indeed we have to look at it in those terms, that when and if there is a necessity, this alliance will be there for each and every ally. However, the main task of the alliance, of course, is so-called collective defense, which is very much around the deterrence. So what is a modern deterrence, which involves a full spectrum of means, not only because it's a nuclear alliance, not only because it has a certain mix of conventional and other capabilities and deployment of forces, but also because it has this political unity, that we have values as our basis, we have the understanding of each other, and we know that if that moment comes, when the assistance is needed, when the involvement is needed, the allies will be there for you. So the deterrence, not to allow the situation become so bad as actually defense is needed, and that has worked. And if a crisis arises, to be able to manage the crisis as much as possible, be it through the operations such as Afghanistan, or now we are indeed working also. We have one of the biggest operations in Kosovo, KFOR, which is also UN mandated. We have Iraq, the NATO mission in Iraq, which will be pretty much around training and building institutions for the Iraqi partners, especially in defense and security field. Or, it depends what other partners want. So it can be around training, it can be around particular types of capability building, it can be even around hybrid threats, toolbox, how to resist cyber and other threats. So there is a variety of tools that NATO uses. And so when we look at that spectrum, so of course, the first core task, collective defense through deterrence and defense. Second, the crisis management. And the third is through this cooperative security, extending support to those partners that ask for it and who needs that, in order to increase, again, the allied security in that respect. So no doubt these core tasks will remain also in the futures. They are not going to be, I can't imagine that they could change anytime soon. We know that Russia's aggressive behavior is just worsening the situation, both in terms of security situation in Euro-Atlantic zone, but also in terms of violations of international law. We know that China is developing the whole set of variety of forces and variety of capabilities that we are not sure what they are about and why it's needed, because of course nobody is threatening China. Then, of course, we also, in the same time, China provides a lot of opportunities in terms of economic. We need China as partner to counter climate challenge. So China is a big zone of interest, I think, for everyone, also in terms of the fact that their values are not exactly the same as we would want them to see in terms of partnership. Then, of course, in that respect, we need also the democratic countries around the globe to work with the 30 NATO allies to strengthen this alliance of democracies that we are. Again, those partnerships can be different, but this is all for this sort of common stability, common security, and for the future. So that's, I think, why also for the US, for an ordinary citizen in the US, even though on an everyday basis they are not going to meet the challenge from Russia, we don't know what's happening in the cyber field, or what's happening with the disinformation, or what's happening with the undermining of our democratic systems, as we saw through the election interference or others, and so on and so forth. So NATO is there.
You're pointing out many aspects of not just Russia, but I wonder if you would agree with the assessment at the time that former Secretary General Anders Rasmussen made when Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea in 2014. He said, "We clearly face the gravest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War." And as you've pointed out, beyond that, Russia has meddled in foreign elections with misinformation and other tools, and has proceeded to develop new nuclear weapons. Is this the number one threat facing NATO today, would you say, Russia?
Well, Russia's aggressive behavior, and aggressive behavior not just in the military and defense terms, but also in terms of disrespect for international law, threatens the whole Euro-Atlantic security and stability, and also undermines global efforts to strengthen international rule of law. So if you look at that, at a wider perspective, countries enter into agreements out of their own free will. So nobody forced Russia to accept the principles of OSCE or the recognition of Ukrainian territory. So when of course part of another country is just illegally annexed, that is the gravest violation that you can possibly imagine. And that type of behavior and use of these subversive measures, be it mercenaries or the sort of covered up troops, and now the support for the separatists in not only eastern Ukraine but also in parts of Georgia, trying to administratively annex those territories, they indeed show very clearly that this behavior has not changed. It has even further aggravated the situation. So, and as you rightly mentioned, it's about indeed military capabilities. It's indeed about lack of transparency in developing those capabilities. It's also with regard to the violations of such international law, basic international law instruments such as the Open Skies or the INF Treaty, which led to the de facto demise of these very important instruments that are important for all of us, for the whole Euro-Atlantic security. And that is not what NATO wanted to see. It was not because of NATO, it was not because of the US, but because of Russian behavior. And if we go down that way, then of course, what is there to not to take seriously? Of course, countries have to take that type of behavior seriously.
Within the NATO 2030 recommendations, the document that experts produced for the Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, last November, I wonder how much addressed the issue of burden sharing, which has been a constant complaint, I guess you would say, from the United States, not just beginning with President Donald Trump, but certainly accelerated by him, the view that with the Allies spending roughly $1 trillion in defense in 2020, 70% of that roughly comes from the United States, up from 50% during the Cold War. How is the NATO 2030 vision accommodating burden sharing, and to what extent is there progress among the allies in making the contributions that the US wants to see?
Indeed, you are right. And I think from what you started at the beginning, that of course people have taken the alliance for granted, and it was these last few years that really showed the value of the alliance, and that there are indeed threats that require development of variety of capabilities and modernizing also the military. And again, it's a political military alliance, and to remain that very strong defense alliance, indeed, the first priority for 2030 is to make it stronger militarily and more and based on more united politically. So investment in defense capabilities and in modern defense capabilities, the actual defense capabilities, is very important. Luckily, we can say that the allies, indeed, all allies have taken that on board. Not all allies have increased their defense spending equally, but compared to when we look back in 2014, there were just 3 allies spending more than 2%. 3 allies spending more than 2%. Now we have 11 allies who are spending more than 2%. Of course, we need more. Of course, we need more. It's not easy for some countries. We can respect that, especially the very small ones. But in the same time, there are a variety of ways how to increase the contribution to the defense. But again, the trend is positive. We have last year we saw that the defense spending rose by more than 3%, close to 4% actually. And in that respect, again, we are very happy to note the trends and the fact also that it results in real capabilities. So where it has been investment has not been just the pensions of military, it has been in actual defense capabilities. And in this modern age, yes, we need that. We need those investments.
The Secretary General Stoltenberg's outreach was not just to experts. As you mentioned, the private sector has been engaged to inform the vision for the next decade, and also youth and young professionals. Could you comment on to what extent the interaction with those parties, those demographics, if you will, have aligned or brought to the fore some differences with what the experts are advising?
Yes, and that is part of what we do in the public diplomacy division, and which is my task also as the Assistant Secretary General. We need to understand our audiences. What do they expect? What do they know? How do they understand NATO? We need also to be fully aware about the information environment around us, not only what our own audiences think and understand, but also actually what is happening around that. And for that, we have developed a pretty in-depth type of both audience research program. We have a fully functioning polling across all 30 allies, quite unique. And it's robust data, which we can segment by youth audiences, by gender, by variety, by regions, by, you know, a lot of other features. And the data is quite remarkable, actually. Also from the tracker last year, we clearly see that the transatlantic bond is supported by such a large majority, 70–80% of the populations across the alliance. So it's not just, you know, the words that we are speaking about. The essence of that is among our people. And of course, we have clearly seen that the youth groups, when we look at the audience group between 18 and 24, they are the least knowledgeable. And because of that, also the least engaged with NATO. So part of the 2030 was also to use this process, the outreach process, that not only keep it among the 10 very, very knowledgeable experts who produce their report, but actually to reach out to the other groups that are essential, who will be running the alliance in 2030 and beyond. So there was extensive process, both in terms of outreach to universities, through a variety of events, through young professionals, but also through an extensive program with private sector. And both to the leaders of the defense industry, but also through the variety of other EDT sort of related companies, because most of the capabilities for the future will be dual use. They are not going to be either civilian or military. Most of them in the future will be dual use. And again, through these younger leaders of private sector, we have learned quite a lot, and also formed extensive links and networks. And for them, it was very interesting actually to hear that NATO is interested. So that was the first question: why is NATO interested in us? And we said, because you are important. You are the stakeholders in the alliance. You will be running it. You benefit. Your companies have been able to be established and successfully function because NATO provides that security, defense, and stability. So it's an essential part of who we are. There is, as Secretary General always says, there is no prosperity without security. And NATO is the DNA and the stable pole that supports it all. So it has been a remarkable process for us at NATO, but also I think it was very interesting for those people who had the dialogue and mutual discussions and engagements in a variety of groups, including very interesting universities in the US. We had a first policy hackathon with a variety of universities, and that was very exciting on the policy ideas side, and what they produced, what they pitched, and what it was about. Remarkable.
Well, I'd just like to mention and turn our discussion to the project that we're doing together, that when you have the other Assistant Secretaries General and the allied ambassadors in pairs who will speak to 6 councils over the next 10 days, they will be certainly engaging with experts, academics, business people, young professionals, and students. So you'll have a real broad and inclusive audience. It's interesting, just to review the geography, we're from Alabama west. So we're staying away from the Atlantic seaboard to talk about transatlantic relations globally with the rest of the country, which is interesting. And also the topics that the 6 will undertake: NATO as a stabilizer in Europe at Colorado Springs to kick us off, the 21st century dilemmas of the nuclear alliance in Albuquerque, New Mexico, climate, security, and green defense in Minnesota, outer space as a domain in Alabama, where the new Space Force will be headquartered soon, energy security and resilient trade in Houston, and closing on May 27th with emerging and disruptive technology and cybersecurity in San Francisco. None of these 6 topics mentions China, yet behind all 6, China factors in a big way. Could you talk about how NATO sees the threat or opportunities for engaging with China?
You are completely right. It's when we look at the spectrum of challenges, that is not just for NATO, but for all our national countries, societies, companies, indeed, from supply chains to climate change effects to a variety of cyber challenges.
Yeah.
Ownership issues, the way businesses are run, be it through subsidies or other competition issues. There is a variety, that of course we can relate to China, but it's very much also about us, right? How we run our economies, how we adjust our supply chains, how we perceive, where our vulnerabilities are. It's about resilience, really, which is across the whole of society, to very much understand and make the society groups and our own citizens sort of aware of the challenges and threats. So in that respect, of course, there are issues that are purely on the military and sort of threat assessment side and security assessment side, which we are trying to understand in terms of military capabilities that China is developing and the purposes and why and what is the actual aim for that, and including in the arms control field, including in other capabilities that is on the harder security side. So in that respect, it's both a sort of something that we need to talk to the Chinese, but also to understand really what it is for. So potentially it's a challenge. But again, China is also the opportunity, and we need the collaboration of China if we are serious about combating climate change. EU alone is around 10% only of global emissions. So, you know, even the EU is just a smaller player if we think about it. So for NATO, of course, it's around the climate security more than anything else that we need to look and address. So in that respect, both in terms of trades, both in terms of the collaboration, in terms of the challenges that we globally have, there are opportunities, but we also have to be serious to understand what is happening in terms of why such developments take place. And then the big issue is values. We believe that indeed human rights, the democratic values, democratic institutions is something that need to be respected, and the behavior and the values that we see from China recently indeed do not necessarily fall into that category.
Thank you. For a final question, I want to mention that, of course, the United States, well, before I do that, I should say in full disclosure, we are working with NATO's Public Diplomacy Division on this project, and we appreciate the modest funding we've received to deliver these programs. It doesn't cover all our costs, so but we are delighted to work on this together. That's our burden sharing. The United States, of course, has treaty obligations beyond NATO, and with relationships in Asia in particular, questions of credibility of whether the U.S. would, back its treaty obligations arose over in recent years, and that has probably occurred within the perspectives of some NATO countries as well. How important is it for this upcoming June 14 Summit of Allied Leaders to see that the Biden administration really is backing the alliance the way the U.S. traditionally has? Is that what you would call a successful outcome, that the U.S. is back, or how would you define a good summit in Brussels?
Indeed, the summit is an opportunity to reaffirm this very strong transatlantic bond that our citizens believe and feel passionate about. And as President of the US has said a number of times, indeed, he's very committed to the US alliances and NATO as the foremost defense alliance. So in that respect, I think also with NATO discussing this more global engagement and approach, that falls within the category where the allied interests are common. Again, these new types of threats and challenges that we look at, be it cyber, be it disinformation, be it undersea cables, be it anything else, the foreign ownerships, undermining democratic institutions, they don't know borders. It's not that they are going to respect the fact that there is a physical border somewhere between the countries. No. The information highways, the technology-enabled threats, they just are everywhere. So very much with our allies, be it in Asia Pacific, be it in other parts in Europe, we need to exchange information, we need to compare notes, and if necessary, we need to actually act together, be it in operations. Afghanistan was a very large operation. It was not just about NATO allies. There were other countries. There were Finland, Sweden, there was Jordan, there was, Afghanistan, New Zealand at some moment. So it's a genuine partnership. But again, in today and in the years to come, it's also about really being committed to our values. I mean, we are democratic alliances, the democratic alliance. We are democratic countries. Our institutions matter. We are respectful of our checks and balances. We are respectful of our legal systems and rule of law. And we want to protect them. This is our strength. This is why our societies and our businesses are growing. This is why so many people want to migrate to our countries. This is, this is what makes us strong. And the same applies to our partners globally. So in that respect, the interests are common. In practical terms, of course, what are the costs that we can jointly impose on the behaviors that has brought about certain cyber attacks or certain other attacks? We need, again, work jointly on some toolboxes and on common responses. What types of actions are to be taken by our democratic countries? The same, again, on the military side. When you think about it, we clearly know that our partners in Asia Pacific know more about certain behaviors and can understand it better than some countries in Europe. So it's a mutually valid and interesting and useful exchange of information. So in that respect, yes, it's just Asia Pacific partners as much as the partners in MENA or elsewhere in Europe. They are NATO's partners, and they are very, very valuable.
That's my hotline saying that our interview must come to a close. I'm just kidding, of course, but Ambassador Braže, thank you for that very important final statement on our values, our shared values. I appreciate very much that we've had half an hour to set the table for our project. I invite the audience to go to NATO2030WACA.org and sign up for the programs, the 6 programs that are coming to you in the next 10 days on a variety of topics facing the NATO alliance as it looks to its 8th decade. Talk about durability and commitment and really our security. You put it very well, Ambassador Braže, and I really appreciate the honor and pleasure of talking with you today.
And again, we are most thankful to the World Affairs Council in America and to you, Mr. Clifford, for this partnership. And we are looking forward to each and every event across the US to be there with you.
Thank you. Be safe. And I look forward to meeting you in DC or Brussels in person sometime soon.
I do the same thing. And have a good day.
Thank you very much.